The day I realized my retirement fund had vanished was the same day I found out my son had been living a double life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Margaret Wilson, though everyone calls me Maggie. For 37 years, I worked as a high school English teacher in the suburbs of Chicago. I raised my son Christopher on my own after his father walked out when Chris was just 3 years old. Never remarried, never regretted it. My life was about two things: my students and my son. When I turned 65, I finally retired with a modest pension and a nest egg I'd carefully built over decades. $287,000 to be exact. Not a fortune by any means, but enough to see me through my golden years if I was careful. I'd planned to travel a little, maybe finally see Paris, and then settle into a quiet life in a smaller home. That was before Christopher came to me with his business proposal. "Mom, this is the opportunity of a lifetime," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with homework and consoled his teenage heartbreaks. "We're going to revolutionize supply chain management for small businesses." At 42, Christopher had always been ambitious but never quite successful. He'd bounced between jobs in the tech sector, always convinced the next venture would be his big break. I'd supported him through college, through his MBA, through his first failed startup. "It's a guaranteed return within 18 months, he explained, sliding a glossy business plan across the table. 20% minimum, possibly up to 40% if we hit our projections. I studied his face, the face I'd memorized from the moment the nurse placed him in my arms. The slight asymmetry to his smile, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow from falling off his bike at 7, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners just like his father's. "How much are you looking for?" I asked, already knowing I would say yes. I always said yes to Christopher. "200,000, he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's enough for us to secure the office space and the initial development team. We've already got 3 major clients lined up." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my tea to hide my hesitation. 200,000 was most of what I had. The responsible part of me, the part that had clipped coupons and worked summer school for extra income, was screaming not to do it. But the mother in me silenced that voice. "I'll need to talk to my financial advisor," I said. "But if he says it's feasible, I'll do it." Christopher's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child opening Christmas presents. He rushed around the table and hugged me tightly. "You won't regret this, Mom. Promise. This is it. This is the one that's going to change everything." 3 days later, I signed the papers making me the primary investor in ChrisConnect Solutions, LLC. My son had insisted on naming me Chief Financial Officer, though it was just a title. I wouldn't be involved in daily operations. "It's just to give the company more credibility," he explained. "But don't worry about anything. I'll handle all the business stuff." For the first 6 months, everything seemed perfect. Christopher would visit every Sunday with updates and charts showing impressive growth. He brought financial statements that, while I didn't fully understand them, looked professional and promising. He'd always dressed sharply in suits I didn't remember him owning before. Driving a new Tesla, he said, was essential for client meetings. "The company image is everything in this business, Mom," he explained when I questioned the expensive car. "Clients won't trust us with their supply chains if we don't look successful." I nodded and served him more of the pot roast he'd loved since childhood, pushing away the small voice that wondered why a startup needed such expensive trappings. It was during this period that Christopher started mentioning his new business trips. Boston, San Francisco, even London and Singapore. He'd send me pictures from these exotic locations. Christopher in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, Christopher in a London pub, Christopher with the Singapore skyline behind him. "The international expansion is happening faster than we projected," he said proudly. "We've got interest from major players in Asia now." I was so proud. My son, my boy who once couldn't manage his paper route money, was becoming a global businessman. When my friends at the retirement community asked about him, I couldn't help but boast. "Christopher's company is expanding internationally," I'd say, watching their impressed nods. "He's really making a name for himself." 9 months after my investment, Christopher asked for the rest of my savings. We were sitting at a restaurant nicer than anywhere I'd ever dined before. He'd insisted on picking me up in his Tesla, and I felt out of place in my department store dress among the wealthy patrons in designer clothes. The thing is, Mom, he said, swirling an expensive whiskey in his glass, we've hit a cash flow issue. It's temporary, just growing pains, but we need an injection of capital to get past this hurdle. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. How much? The remaining $87,000, he said, his voice casual as if he were asking to borrow $20. With this infusion, we'll be able to secure the British contract, which means your initial investment will triple rather than just double. I set my fork down. Christopher, that's all I have left. My entire retirement. He reached across the table and took my hand. His was warm, mine had gone cold. Mom, have I ever let you down? This is for both of us. In 6 months you'll have close to $1 million. You can buy that condo in Florida you've always talked about. I hadn't always talked about a Florida condo. I'd mentioned it once in passing years ago, but I said yes anyway. Of course I did. The next day, I transferred the remaining $87,000 to the ChrisConnect business account. Christopher had made me a signatory, though I'd never used my access. He said it was just proper corporate governance. For a few weeks after that second investment, Christopher was attentive. He called daily with updates, brought me flowers, even took me to a Broadway show when it came through Chicago. But then the calls became less frequent. Sunday dinners were canceled at the last minute due to emergency client situations. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. Is everything all right with the business? I asked one evening when he actually showed up for dinner, though he was an hour late. Better than all right, he assured me. We're in high-level negotiations that could quadruple our valuation. I'm just busy, Mom. Really busy. The change came 3 months after my second investment. I was at home sorting through some old photographs for a scrapbook project when my doorbell rang. It was Linda, my next-door neighbor who had become my close friend since retirement. Maggie, you need to see this, she said, her face unusually serious as she handed me her iPad. I wasn't snooping, I promise. I follow businesses in the tech sector because of my nephew's work, and this came across my feed. It was an article about emerging tech companies in the Midwest. I scrolled through, confused about what I was supposed to be seeing, until I reached a sidebar listing notable failures and shutdowns. There, in small print, ChrisConnect Solutions LLC filed for dissolution last month after failing to secure market share. My hands began to shake. This must be a mistake, I said. Christopher's company is expanding internationally. He's securing contracts in London. Linda took my hand. Maggie, I checked the state business registry. ChrisConnect was officially dissolved 6 weeks ago. The room seemed to tilt sideways. That can't be right. Christopher would have told me. I'm the CFO. Linda's voice was gentle. Have you seen any official paperwork lately? Any actual contracts or financial statements? I hadn't. Not for months. Just Christopher's verbal updates and some charts he'd show me on his laptop, never leaving the documents with me for review. I need to check something, I said, moving to my computer with legs that suddenly felt 20 years older. With Linda's help, I logged into the bank account associated with ChrisConnect, the one where I'd deposited my entire life savings. Balance: $247.53. I must have made a small sound because Linda was instantly at my side, her arm around my shoulders. Look at the transactions, she urged gently. I did, and what I saw made no sense. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Payments to luxury retailers. A transaction for a down payment on property in Lake Forest, one of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs. First-class airline tickets. None of it sounded like business expenses for a supply chain management company. I don't understand, I whispered. Where did my money go? Linda looked at me with such pity that I had to turn away. I think you need to talk to Christopher, she said. I called him immediately. No answer. I texted. Need to talk about ChrisConnect urgently. No response. By evening, after a dozen ignored calls and messages, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Christopher's apartment unannounced. Except when I arrived at the address listed on all his official documents, the building manager informed me that Christopher Wilson had moved out 2 months ago. Oh, he and his family relocated to Lake Forest, the man said casually. Beautiful home from what he told me. His wife was thrilled about the schools for their kids. I gripped the counter to stay upright. His wife? Kids? The manager looked confused. Yes, his wife Jessica. Lovely woman, came to all the building events. And the twins, cutest 5-year-olds you'll ever see. I somehow found my way back to my car before the tears came. Christopher wasn't married. Christopher didn't have children. Christopher had never introduced me to a Jessica or any twins. Christopher visited me every Sunday, or had until recently. Except he hadn't. My son, my only child, had another life I knew nothing about. With hands that wouldn't stop trembling, I pulled out my phone and searched property records for Lake Forest. It took only minutes to find it. A $1.2 million home purchased 2 months ago by Christopher and Jessica Wilson. I drove there. I don't remember the journey. Just the moment I pulled up in front of the stunning colonial home with its manicured lawn and luxury cars in the driveway. A Tesla and a Range Rover. Through the large bay window, I could see a dining room where people were gathered around a table. Even from the street, I recognized Christopher's laugh. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching my son interact with strangers who clearly knew him intimately. A beautiful blonde woman who touched his arm affectionately. 2 small children with Christopher's eyes. An older couple who must have been the woman's parents, given their resemblance. A family dinner. With his actual family. While I sat alone in my car, having just discovered that my retirement fund was gone. I wanted to storm in. To demand answers. To ask when he had built this entire life without a word to me. To ask why he had stolen from me, because that's what it was, theft regardless of the paperwork I'd signed. Instead, I drove home in a daze. I had financial forms to review, bank statements to examine, the truth to uncover in all its ugly detail. That night I didn't sleep. I pulled every document related to ChrisConnect, spreading them across my dining room table. I called in favors from a former student who now worked as a financial analyst. I researched business dissolution procedures and fraud reporting. What emerged was a picture so clear and so heartbreaking that I could barely breathe through the pain of it. ChrisConnect Solutions had never been a real company, not in any functional sense. It had been legally established, yes, but had never had employees, office space, or clients. The business plan had been largely plagiarized from actual tech companies. The financial projections were fantasy. Every penny I had invested, my entire life savings of $287,000, had gone directly into funding Christopher's lifestyle, and apparently his secret family. The international business trips, family vacations, documented on social media accounts I'd never seen. Accounts where Christopher Wilson was a devoted family man with a wife of 7 years and twin children. The expensive suits and Tesla? All bought with my retirement money. The growing business with international clients? A complete fabrication. My son had stolen everything from me, using my love and trust as his tools. By morning I had moved beyond shock and tears to a cold, clear anger unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I made coffee, dressed carefully in my best outfit, a navy suit I'd worn to my retirement party, and made 3 phone calls, one to my bank, one to a lawyer recommended by my former student, and one to Linda, asking her to drive me to Lake Forest. "Are you sure about this?" Linda asked as we pulled up in front of the colonial house, now bathed in morning sunlight. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I walked up to the front door with Linda a step behind me and rang the doorbell. It was answered by the blonde woman I'd seen through the window, Jessica, presumably. "Can I help you?" she asked with a polite smile. "I'm here to see Christopher," I said. "I'm his mother." Her expression changed to one of confusion. "Christopher's mother? But that's not. I mean, Christopher told me his mother died when he was young. Of all the lies, this one cut the deepest. He had erased me entirely. As you can see," I said, forcing a smile, "I'm very much alive. Is he home?" Jessica's face had drained of color. "Children, go upstairs, please," she called over her shoulder to 2 small figures visible in the living room. Then she stepped back. "You'd better come in." Christopher was in his home office, focused on his computer screen. He didn't look up when the door opened. "Jess, can you grab my—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. The color drained from his face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Christopher," I said calmly. I believe we need to talk about Chris Connect Solutions. And about my $287,000. Jessica, standing behind me, made a small gasping sound. What is she talking about, Chris? Christopher stood up, moving toward me with his hands outstretched. Mom, this isn't the place to discuss business matters. Let me take you home, and we can talk privately. No, I said, taking a step back. I think right here, right now, is the perfect place to discuss how you stole my entire retirement fund to finance your secret life. Jessica moved to stand beside me, facing her husband. Chris, what is she saying? What retirement fund? I turned to her. My name is Margaret Wilson. I raised Christopher as a single mother. 3 months ago, he took the last of my savings, $287,000 in total, supposedly to invest in his tech company. A company that I've just discovered was dissolved weeks ago after never actually conducting any business. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. The house down payment, she whispered. The cars. You said it was from your business profits. Christopher's face hardened. Both of you need to calm down. This is a misunderstanding. Mom, I told you there were cash flow issues. The business hit some unexpected obstacles. Stop lying. I interrupted, my voice like ice. I've seen the bank records. You transferred my money directly into your personal accounts. You never hired employees. You never leased office space. You never had clients. It was all a lie. Jessica was staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. Chris, tell me this isn't true. He looked from his wife to me, and I saw something change in his expression, a calculation, a shift in strategy. Mom's exaggerating, he said to Jessica, his voice softening. She agreed to invest in my business venture, yes. It didn't work out, these things happen in startups. But she's making it sound like I committed a crime when this was a legitimate business risk we both understood. I laughed, a short, harsh sound that surprised even me. A legitimate business risk? You dissolved the company without telling me, the supposed CFO. You used the money to buy luxury items in this house. You told your wife I was dead. Jessica turned to me, her face pale. I don't understand. Chris told me his funding came from angel investors. He had just one angel, I said quietly. And he clipped my wings. At that moment, the office door pushed open slightly, and 2 small faces peered in. A boy and a girl with Christopher's eyes, looking confused and concerned. Daddy, the little girl said. Why is Grandma yelling? Christopher froze. Jessica looked at the children, then at me, then at her husband. They think your mother is my mother, she said slowly. You told them my mother was their only grandmother. The little boy was staring at me curiously. Are you our other grandma? Before I could answer, Christopher moved quickly to the door, ushering the children out. Go downstairs and watch TV, okay? Grown-ups need to talk. When he turned back to face us, his expression had changed completely. The charm was gone, replaced by something cold and defensive. What exactly do you want, Mom? You want to ruin my life? Destroy my family? Is that why you came here? I want my money back, I said simply. Every penny of it. And if I don't get it, my next stop is the police station to file fraud charges, followed by a visit to a prosecutor friend of mine who specializes in financial crimes. Christopher laughed, but there was no humor in it. You won't do that. You won't send your only son to prison. Try me, I said, meeting his gaze directly. You're not the son I raised. I don't know who you are anymore. Jessica moved to the desk and opened Christopher's laptop. I want to see these bank records, she said, her voice shaking. Show me where this money came from, Chris. For the next hour, in that beautiful home bought with my stolen retirement, the full extent of Christopher's deception unfolded. Jessica, who I learned was indeed his wife of 7 years, had believed his story of business success. She hadn't questioned the sudden influx of money that had funded their lifestyle upgrade, the private schools for the twins, the luxury cars. She hadn't known about me because Christopher had told her I died of cancer when he was 11, a story she'd had no reason to doubt. The older couple I'd seen at dinner were indeed her parents, who had embraced Christopher as their own son. Those business trips, Jessica said numbly, scrolling through bank statements. Those were your visits to your mother, weren't they? Christopher didn't answer. He sat in his expensive desk chair. watching as his two worlds collided and destroyed each other. Finally, Jessica looked up at me. "I am so sorry," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I had no idea. None at all." I believed her. The shock and horror on her face were too genuine to fake. "What happens now?" Christopher finally asked, his voice flat. "Now," I said, standing up straight, "you have a choice. You can transfer every remaining penny back to me immediately and work out a payment plan for the rest, or I can press charges for fraud and elder abuse. Your decision." Christopher stared at me, his face a mask of calculation. I recognized that expression. It was the same one he'd worn as a teenager when caught in a lie, weighing his options, measuring how much trouble he was really in. "You wouldn't," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You wouldn't send your own son to jail." "The son I raised wouldn't have stolen his mother's retirement savings," I replied evenly. "The son I raised wouldn't have told his wife and children that I was dead." "I don't know who you are anymore, Christopher, but you're not the boy I raised." Jessica stood up from the desk, her face pale but composed. "I'll give you a minute," she said, walking out and closing the door behind her. In the silence that followed, I studied my son's face. The features I'd memorized over 4 decades now seemed like a stranger's. Had the calculating coldness always been there, hidden beneath the surface? Had I been blind to who he really was, or had something changed him? "Why?" I finally asked. It was the only question that mattered. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. "It started small," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The business was real initially. I did try. But when the first round of funding fell through, we were already committed to the house, the private school tuition." He gestured vaguely. "Jessica's parents have money. Her sister lives in a mansion in Winnetka. There were expectations. So you decided to steal from me instead of being honest with your wife about your financial situation?" He winced at the word steal, but didn't deny it. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd replace it once the business took off. "But there was no business," I said. "There could have been," he insisted, a flash of the old Christopher's passion breaking through. "The concept was sound. If I'd secured the right partnerships." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. You've been lying for so long you can't even be honest with yourself." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on his desk. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer every penny left in all your accounts to me right now. Then we're going to work out a payment plan for the rest." Christopher's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" "Then I walk straight to the Lake Forest Police Department. Financial fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. Since you used my status as CFO without my knowledge. I've already spoken with the prosecutor. The evidence is clear." For a moment I thought he would continue to fight. Then his shoulders slumped. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll transfer what's left. But it's not much. Most of it went into the house down payment, the cars." "Then you'll need to sell the house," I said coldly. "And the cars." He looked up, alarmed. "Mom, be reasonable. That would destroy my family. You should have thought of that before you destroyed mine." The door opened and Jessica stepped back in, her eyes red but her posture straight. "I've been listening," she said. "And I agree with your mother. We need to sell the house." Christopher turned to her, betrayal written across his face. "Jess, come on. Think about the kids, the schools." "I am thinking about the kids," she cut him off. "What kind of example would we be setting if we kept living in a house bought with stolen money? Money stolen from their grandmother, no less." She turned to me. "Ms. Wilson, I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to make this right." Something in her expression, the moral clarity, the willingness to face hard truths, reminded me of myself at her age. In that moment, despite everything, I felt a flicker of connection to this woman who was technically my daughter-in-law. "Thank you, Jessica," I said. "And please call me Maggie." What followed was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. For the next 2 hours, I sat in that beautiful home watching as my son transferred what remained of my savings back to my account. Approximately $42,000. Jessica brought in her laptop and began researching how quickly they could list the house. Christopher sat in stony silence, only speaking when directly asked a question. The cars will need to go too, Jessica said matter-of-factly. Both of them. We can get a used sedan for now. Christopher looked like he wanted to argue but remained silent. As Jessica worked, I learned more about their life together. They'd met when Christopher was working at a tech startup in the city, a legitimate job he'd had before launching his series of failed ventures. Jessica was a graphic designer who now freelanced while raising the twins. Her parents had helped them financially over the years, which explained how they'd maintained a middle-class lifestyle despite Christopher's spotty employment history. They thought he was an entrepreneur, Jessica explained, her voice tight. They were so proud when he started talking about his supply chain company. My father even introduced him to potential investors. I winced, imagining the ripple effects of Christopher's lies. Did any of them invest? No, Christopher interjected quickly. The business never got that far. Jessica gave him a look that suggested she wasn't entirely sure she believed him anymore. I made a mental note to follow up on this point later. The twins eventually wandered back upstairs, curious about the stranger in their home. Jessica knelt down to their level. Emily, Ethan. This is your grandmother, Margaret. Your dad's mom. The children looked at me with undisguised curiosity. But Daddy said his mommy died, Emily said, confusion clouding her small face. The simplicity of the child's statement hit me like a physical blow. My son had erased me so completely that these children, my own flesh and blood, my grandchildren, had grown 5 years without knowing I existed. Your daddy was mistaken, I said gently, kneeling down despite my arthritic knees. I'm very much alive, and I've been looking forward to meeting you both. It wasn't exactly true. I hadn't known they existed until yesterday, but it felt right in the moment. Ethan, who I was learning was the more reserved of the twins, studied me carefully. You look like Daddy around the eyes, he finally declared. Despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my lips. That's because he got his eyes from me. The children were quickly ushered away by Jessica to have lunch, leaving me alone with Christopher again. They seem like wonderful children, I said. They are, he replied, a softness entering his voice for the first time. They're the best thing I've ever done. I wanted to ask why, if he loved them so much, he would risk their security and stability with his schemes. Why he would deprive them of a grandmother who would have loved them fiercely. But I held my tongue. Those questions were for another day, when the raw wound of his betrayal had scabbed over at least a little. Instead, I pulled out the document my lawyer had prepared. A repayment agreement that would govern how Christopher would restore the remaining $245,000 he had taken from me. This is legally binding, I explained, sliding it across the desk. It acknowledges the debt and sets up a payment schedule. If you default, the consequences are outlined on page 3. Christopher skimmed the document, his expression darkening. Mom, this is impossible. $5,000 a month? Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? From a job, Christopher. A real one. He looked up sharply. You think I can just walk into some corporation and get hired at a salary that would cover this? I think you're intelligent, well-educated, and perfectly capable of earning a good living if you apply yourself, I replied. Your MBA wasn't cheap. It's time you actually used it. Jessica returned as Christopher was still staring at the document. What's this? She asked. I explained the repayment agreement. To my surprise, Jessica nodded approvingly. It's fair, she said to Christopher. More than fair, considering the alternative. Christopher looked between us, a flicker of the old charm returning to his expression. Come on, both of you. There has to be another way. Mom, what if I found investors for a new venture? Something with real potential this time. I could pay you back double. No, Jessica and I said simultaneously. Christopher signed the agreement. As I prepared to leave with Linda, who had been waiting patiently, Jessica walked me to the door. Will you come back? She asked quietly. For the children, I mean. They should know their grandmother. I hesitated. The thought of maintaining a relationship with Christopher after what he'd done seemed impossible. But the twins were innocent. I'd like that, I finally said. But I'll need some time. Of course, Jessica replied. She hesitated, then added, I want you to know that I'll make sure he keeps his word about the payments. If he doesn't. She squared her shoulders. If he doesn't, I'll contact you immediately. I believed her. In the space of a morning, this woman had discovered her husband was a liar and a thief, that her comfortable life was built on a foundation of deceit, and she had faced it with a strength I couldn't help but admire. "Thank you, Jessica," I said. On impulse, I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Take care of yourself and those beautiful children." "I will." She paused. "And Maggie?" "I truly am sorry." As Linda drove me home, silence filled the car. Finally, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "What will you do now?" It was the question I'd been avoiding since discovering Christopher's betrayal. My comfortable retirement was gone. Even with the repayment agreement, it would be years before I recovered the full amount years I'd planned to spend traveling, reading, enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. "I don't know," I admitted. "Go back to work, I suppose." "Teaching?" Linda asked. I nodded. "If I can. There's always demand for substitute teachers." "You could sue them for the house," Linda suggested. "Your money paid for it, after all." I shook my head. "That would only hurt the children. And Jessica's already agreed to sell it." We rode in silence a bit longer before Linda spoke again. "You know, my nephew, the one in tech I mentioned? His company is looking for someone to manage their educational outreach program. It's part-time, good pay. I could put in a word." By the time we reached my house, the outlines of a new plan were taking shape. It wasn't the retirement I'd envisioned, but perhaps it could be something meaningful nevertheless. The next 3 months were among the most difficult of my life. I took Linda's nephew up on his job offer, working 20 hours a week coordinating the tech company's partnerships with local schools. The pay was good, but not enough to fully support me without dipping into what remained of my savings. I also registered with the school district as a substitute teacher to fill the gaps. Christopher made the first 2 monthly payments on time. The third was late, requiring a stern call from my lawyer. Jessica sold the Tesla and Range Rover, replacing them with a used Honda. The house went on the market but hadn't sold yet. The luxury real estate market in Lake Forest moved slowly. I'd visited the twins twice, carefully orchestrated afternoons at a park where Jessica brought them to meet me. Christopher was conspicuously absent both times. The children were cautiously warming up to me, especially Emily, who seemed fascinated by my stories about her father as a boy. "Did Daddy really win a spelling bee?" she asked during our second meeting, her eyes wide. "He did," I confirmed, smiling at the memory. "When he was 8. The winning word was perseverance." The irony wasn't lost on me. It was during this period that I received an unexpected phone call from Jessica's father, Robert Winters. "Ms. Wilson," he said when I answered. "We haven't met, but I'm Jessica's father. I hope you don't mind my calling." "Not at all," I replied, curious about what could prompt this contact. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice grave. "When Jessica told us what happened, what Christopher did to you, my wife and I were horrified. We'd had no idea, of course, but still. We should have asked more questions about where the money was coming from." "You had no reason to doubt him," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Christopher can be very convincing when he wants to be." There was a pause before Robert continued. "The thing is, Ms. Wilson, we've been thinking. This situation, it doesn't sit right with us. Jessica and the twins staying in that house while you're forced back to work at your age." I bristled slightly at the implication that I was too old to work, but let him continue. "Angela and I would like to make you an offer," he said. "We'd like to buy out Christopher's remaining debt to you. Pay it off in full immediately." I nearly dropped the phone. "That's very generous, but it's a substantial amount. Almost $250,000. "We're aware," Robert replied. "We're fortunate to be in a position where we can do this. Not without feeling it, mind you, but without hardship." "Why would you do this?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. Robert sighed heavily. "Partially because it's the right thing to do. Partially because we want to protect our daughter and grandchildren from years of financial strain. And partially—" he hesitated. "Partially because we feel we failed you too, Ms. Wilson. We welcomed Christopher into our family without ever questioning his story about you. We should have wondered why he had no family at our wedding. We should have asked more questions." I found myself blinking back tears. "Mr. Winters." "Robert, please." "Robert." You don't owe me anything. You were deceived just as I was. Nevertheless, he said firmly, we'd like to do this. With one condition. What's that? We'd like you to maintain a relationship with Emily and Ethan. They should know their grandmother. I agreed to meet with Robert and his wife Angela to discuss the details. A week later we sat in a lawyer's office, my lawyer and theirs working out an agreement. The Winters would pay off Christopher's debt to me in full. In exchange, I would not pursue any legal action against Christopher that might result in him being separated from his children. To be clear, my lawyer emphasized, Mrs. Wilson is not waiving her right to press charges if Mr. Wilson commits any new offenses against her. This agreement relates solely to the current situation. The Winters nodded in understanding. By the end of the meeting, papers were signed, and a weight lifted from my shoulders. I would have my retirement funds back. I could stop working 2 jobs. I could breathe again. As we were leaving, Angela Winters touched my arm gently. We'd like you to come to Sunday dinner next week, she said. The children miss you. I hesitated. Will Christopher be there? Yes, she admitted. He's still our son-in-law and the children's father. But Jessica has made it very clear to him that he's on probation. One more lie, one more scheme, and she's done. I considered declining. The thought of sitting across a dinner table from Christopher, making polite conversation after what he'd done, seemed impossible. But then I thought of Emily and Ethan. Of Jessica trying to rebuild her life on honest foundations. I'll be there, I said. The Sunday dinner was as awkward as I'd feared. Christopher barely spoke, focusing intently on his food. Jessica and her parents worked overtime to keep conversation flowing. The twins, oblivious to the tension, chattered happily, especially when dessert was served. As Angela brought out coffee, Robert cleared his throat. Christopher, I believe you have something to say. My son looked up, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he might refuse. Then he set down his fork and looked directly at me for the first time that evening. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice flat. What I did was wrong. The words were right, but there was no genuine remorse behind them. This was Christopher going through the motions, saying what was expected of him. I'd seen this performance many times before, after he'd crashed my car as a teenager, after he'd dropped out of his first college program, after each failure or transgression throughout his life. But something was different this time. I was different. No, you're not, I said quietly. Not yet. But maybe someday you will be. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jessica looked alarmed, the Winters exchanged glances, and Christopher's expression hardened. What do you want from me? He finally asked, a hint of anger breaking through his careful facade. I said I'm sorry. The money's being paid back. What more do you want? I want you to mean it, I replied simply. I want you to understand what you did. Not just to me, but to your wife, your children, Jessica's parents. I want you to take responsibility, not because you're being forced to, but because you genuinely regret your actions. That might take some time, Jessica interjected gently. I nodded. I know. And I'm willing to wait. The rest of the dinner passed in subdued conversation. As I was preparing to leave, Christopher approached me in the foyer while the others were in the kitchen. They're selling the house, he said abruptly. We're moving to a rental next month. I know, I replied. Jessica told me. He nodded, looking past me rather than at me. We'll be 20 minutes closer to your place. It was the closest thing to an olive branch he could manage, I realized. A tacit acknowledgement that I would be part of their lives moving forward. That distance wouldn't be an excuse to keep the children from me. That will be nice for the twins, I said. They can visit more often. Another nod then. I did try, with the business. It wasn't all a lie. I studied my son's face, the face I'd loved from the moment he was born. There was still a wall between us, perhaps one that would never fully come down. But behind it I caught a glimpse of something that might, with time and effort, grow into genuine remorse. I believe you, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. But maybe believing in him, or at least in his potential to change, was the first step toward whatever our relationship would become. 6 months later, my life had taken a shape I never could have predicted. The educational outreach job had become a fulfilling part-time career that I genuinely enjoyed. My financial situation was secure again, thanks to the winter's generosity. I'd even managed a 2-week trip to Paris, a delayed but appreciated fulfillment of my retirement dream. Christopher and Jessica were living in a modest rental home, rebuilding their marriage on more honest foundations. Jessica had returned to full-time work as a graphic designer. Christopher, after several months of half-hearted job searching, had finally secured a position with a legitimate tech company, a junior role that wounded his pride but paid the bills. The twins spent one weekend a month with me, filling my quiet house with noise and life. Emily had taken to calling me Gamma Maggie, a name that warmed my heart every time I heard it. Ethan remained more reserved but would curl up beside me to read stories, his small body trusting against mine. My relationship with Christopher remained complicated. He visited with the family but rarely spoke to me directly. When he did, it was about practical matters, pick-up times for the children, logistics of family gatherings. The easiness between us was gone, possibly forever. But on a crisp October afternoon, as I sat watching the twins play in my backyard, Christopher joined me on the porch steps. "They love coming here," he said, nodding toward the children. "I love having them," I replied. We sat in silence for a while before he spoke again. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said, eyes fixed on his children. "Jessica's condition for staying together." I nodded but remained silent, sensing he wasn't finished. "He says I have narcissistic tendencies." Christopher gave a short, humorless laugh. "Apparently that's why I could justify taking your money. In my mind it wasn't really stealing because I deserved it, or because I'd pay it back eventually, or because family money is just there for the taking." It was the most insight he'd shown into his actions since the day I'd confronted him. "Does that help?" I asked. "Understanding why you did it?" He shrugged. "Maybe. It doesn't change what I did, but it might help me not do something like that again." He paused. "Jessica deserves better." "Yes," I agreed. "She does. So did you," he added quietly. I turned to look at him, surprised by the admission. His eyes met mine briefly before returning to watch the children. "I did," I acknowledged. Another silence then. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not ready to. Maybe someday but not yet." He nodded, accepting this. Emily's shout of laughter drew our attention as she chased her brother around the old oak tree in my yard. They were beautiful, these grandchildren I'd almost never known. In them I could see echoes of Christopher as a child, before the lies, before the betrayal. I could also see Jessica's strength and the winter's decency. "They're worth it," I said softly. "All of this, the hurt, the rebuilding. They're worth it." Christopher really looked at me for the first time in months. "Yeah," he said. "They are." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to making things right. But as we sat there watching the next generation play in the autumn sunlight, I felt something shift between us. A tiny crack in the wall. A small possibility that someday, we might find our way back to some version of family. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if Christopher will ever truly understand the damage he caused or feel genuine remorse for his actions. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again. But I do know this. I am stronger than I thought. More resilient. More capable of beginning again, even in the autumn of my life. And I know that sometimes, when life forces you onto an unexpected path, you discover landscapes you never would have seen otherwise. A year after the confrontation at Christopher's Lake Forest home, I find myself in a place I never expected to be. Not just financially secure again, but genuinely happy in this new chapter of my life. The educational outreach program I joined has blossomed under my guidance. What began as a small initiative connecting tech professionals with local high schools has expanded to serve the entire Chicago metropolitan area. Last month, the company made me director of the program with a substantial salary increase and the budget to hire 2 assistants. "Your classroom experience gives you insights none of us tech people have," my boss, Linda's nephew Michael, told me when he offered the promotion. "The students relate to you in a way they don't with the engineers." I still substitute teach occasionally, but now it's because I want to, not because I need to. There's something about standing in front of a classroom that still feeds my soul after all these years. The twins are now regular fixtures in my life. They stay with me one weekend a month, and I've become part of their daily routine. Picking them up from school on Wednesdays, attending their soccer games and dance recitals. Emily and I have a special handshake that makes her giggle every time. Ethan has started asking me to help with his reading homework, proudly showing off his improving skills. Jessica and I have developed a relationship I never expected. Something like friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared love for the children. She calls me regularly with updates, sends me photos, seeks my advice on parenting challenges. Last month, she asked if I would help her plan Emily and Ethan's 6th birthday party. "You know them so well now," she said. "And they adore you. The Winters have become like family to me. Not replacing the son who betrayed me, but filling a void I hadn't realized was there." Robert and I meet for coffee every few weeks. Angela has invited me into her garden club. Last Christmas, they insisted I join their family gathering at their lake house. "You're part of this family now, Maggie," Angela told me. Her arm linked through mine as we watched the children open presents, whether Christopher likes it or not. As for Christopher himself, our relationship remains a work in progress. The mandatory therapy sessions seem to be having some effect. There are glimpses of genuine reflection, moments when I catch him watching me with Emily and Ethan with what looks like regret in his eyes. He's been promoted at his job, a legitimate accomplishment this time. He brought the news to a family dinner with a cautious pride that reminded me of the boy he once was. "It's not glamorous," he admitted, "but it's real. I earned it." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I nodded, acknowledging both the achievement and the unspoken recognition of how different this was from his previous successes. I still don't trust him completely. I'm not sure I ever will. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't an all-or-nothing proposition. It comes in layers, in moments, in small choices to move forward, rather than remain frozen in pain. Recently, I finally made the trip to Paris I'd dreamed of for decades. I walked along the Seine, sat in cafes watching the world go by, visited the museums I'd taught about for years but never seen. It was everything I'd hoped for. And as I stood on a bridge looking at Notre Dame in the evening light, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo from Jessica, the twins at their t-ball game, covered in dirt and beaming with identical grins. Christopher stood behind them, one hand on each child's shoulder, looking directly at the camera. "They made us promise to send this to Gamma Maggie right away," Jessica's message read. "Christopher wanted me to tell you the coach says they have your competitive spirit." I smiled, saved the photo, and turned back to the view. The sun was setting over Paris, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Not the retirement I had planned, certainly. But standing there, with the evidence of my unexpected new family in my hand and the city of light spread before me, I realized something important. Sometimes the most beautiful paths are the ones we never intended to walk. I put my phone away and walked slowly back to my hotel, planning the stories I would tell the twins about Paris when I returned. Emily would love hearing about the carousels in the parks. Ethan would be fascinated by the gargoyles on Notre Dame. There would be postcards for them in my suitcase, carefully chosen for each child's interests. In 3 days I'd be home. Back to my job, my garden club, my book group with Linda. Back to Wednesday pickups and weekend sleepovers. Back to the complicated dance of my relationship with Christopher. But for now I had Paris. And for the first time in my life, I had it without guilt, without worry, without counting pennies or wondering if I should have saved the money instead. Perhaps that was the most unexpected gift of Christopher's betrayal. It had forced me to rebuild not just my finances but my entire sense of self. The woman who had always said yes to her son, who had always put others first, had learned to say yes to herself as well. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd been keeping since the confrontation. I'd started it as a way to process my anger and grief, but it had evolved into something more. A record of my rebirth, of the lessons learned from my journey through betrayal to something like peace. "Today I saw Paris," I wrote. "And tomorrow, whatever comes, I am ready."